Get out of my house, my mother-in-law, Evelyn, screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the estate I had purchased with my own money. She slammed her hand on the mahogany dining table, her gold bracelets clinking together like armor. My husband, Julian, stood behind her, his arms crossed, staring down at his polished leather shoes and refusing to meet my eyes. For 2 years, they had treated me like a glorified house guest in my own life, a quiet, accommodating woman who just happened to sign the checks. Evelyn thought she held all the cards because her beloved son was the CEO of Vanguard Logistics, the crown jewel of our family's business portfolio. She genuinely believed she was casting me out into the cold, stripped of dignity and status. But as I picked up my phone and unlocked the screen, I didn't cry and I didn't pack a bag. I just smiled. Because what Evelyn didn't know, and what Julian was too terrified to tell her, was that 20 minutes ago, the board had voted unanimously. Her precious son wasn't CEO anymore. I was. My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old, a senior financial auditor by trade, and up until that humiliating Tuesday evening, I believed patience was a virtue. I spent my late 20s building a multi-million-dollar portfolio through smart real estate acquisitions and rigorous market investments. When I married Julian 3 years ago, I bought our sprawling 4-bedroom estate entirely in my name, foolishly believing we were building a partnership. But the moment his mother, Evelyn, moved into our guest suite, the atmosphere shifted. She didn't see a successful, self-made woman who funded her son's lifestyle. She saw an obstacle. To Evelyn, Julian was the golden child, the brilliant young executive who had recently been appointed CEO of Vanguard Logistics. She treated our home as her personal kingdom, subtly rewriting my boundaries, redecorating my rooms, and treating me like an uninvited roommate in my own house. I kept quiet to keep the peace, constantly convincing myself that family required compromise. I let her condescending remarks slide when she criticized my cooking or dismissed my career, never realizing that my silence was only feeding her arrogance. She genuinely convinced herself that I was entirely dependent on her son's prestige. Get out of my house. Evelyn's screech cut through the dining room, sharp enough to shatter glass. She stood at the head of the table, her face flushed with a terrifying mix of rage and triumph. She slammed her hand down against the dark mahogany surface, the table I had personally ordered and paid for, making the silver candle holders rattle. Julian is the head of this family, she continued, her voice trembling with synthetic authority. He is a CEO. He carries the weight of a major corporation on his shoulders, and he does not need a cold, unsupportive leech dragging him down. I turned my head slowly toward Julian. He was standing near the grand archway, his tall frame leaning against the doorframe, hands shoved deep into his trousers. He couldn't even look me in the eyes. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed firmly on his polished leather shoes, his silence speaking volumes. He was letting her fight his battles, completely content to let his mother toss me onto the street if it meant preserving his fragile, inflated ego. Evelyn stepped closer to me, her finger pointing directly at the front door. Pack your bags, Clara. You're done here. I didn't scream back. I didn't cry, beg, or hurl insult for insult. Instead, I let out a slow, quiet breath and nodded, maintaining a calm composure that visibly unnerved my mother-in-law. If that's how you feel, Evelyn, I said softly, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I turned away and walked up the grand staircase toward the master suite, taking my time as my heels clicked steadily against the marble floor. Behind me, I could hear Evelyn chuckling to Julian, boasting about how easily she had put me in my place. In the bedroom, I grabbed a small leather duffel bag. I didn't pack my expensive jewelry, my designer clothes, or my sentimental items. I simply reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a heavy black leather binder, and slipped it inside the bag alongside my tablet. For the past 6 months, Julian had grown increasingly careless at Vanguard Logistics, treating company capital like his personal piggy bank to fund his mother's lavish lifestyle. He assumed my quiet nature meant I wasn't paying attention. He forgot that before I was his wife, I was a senior financial auditor. And he completely overlooked who actually held the purse strings. What Julian and Evelyn had conveniently forgotten was how Vanguard Logistics actually survived its early years. When the company was on the brink of bankruptcy 4 years ago, it wasn't Julian's leadership that saved it. It was my private capital. I had quietly funneled over $3 million into the firm through my holding company, securing a 51% majority ownership stake and a permanent seat as chair of the board. I had deliberately stepped back, allowing Julian to take the title of CEO to boost his confidence while I monitored the macro financials from the shadows. But over the past year, Julian's arrogance grew alongside his mother's demands. My auditing background kicked in when I noticed bizarre line item expenditures, six-figure consulting fees routed to Evelyn's fake event planning firm, private jet rentals for family vacations, and reckless misallocations of capital. He wasn't just mismanaging the company. He was committing blatant corporate embezzlement to impress his mother. For 3 weeks, I worked quietly with the board's independent legal team, compiling an airtight audit report. That very morning, while Evelyn was planning her next home renovation project and Julian was playing golf, I called an emergency board meeting. The evidence of his gross negligence was undeniable, leaving the board with only one logical path forward. I zipped up my duffel bag and walked back down the stairs, the heavy black binder tucked firmly under my arm. Evelyn was sitting in the living room, sipping wine from my crystal glasses and already discussing floor plans for her new home on her phone. Julian was standing by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch, looking like a man who thought he had finally won. "Oh, look," Evelyn sneered, setting her phone down. "The guest is finally leaving. Make sure you hand over the house keys before you walk out that door." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to the mahogany table, unzipped my bag, and dropped the heavy binder onto the surface with a loud, resounding thud. The sudden noise made both of them jump. "What is this nonsense?" Julian snapped, stepping forward with a scowl. "That's the official decree from the emergency board meeting held 20 minutes ago," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "Effective immediately, Julian, you've been terminated as CEO of Vanguard Logistics for gross financial negligence and corporate embezzlement." Julian's face went completely drained of color. His hand trembled, dropping his glass of scotch onto the rug. You can't do that." "I can," I replied, pulling up the official document on my tablet and sliding it toward him. "As majority owner holding 51% of Vanguard shares, I just did. And as of 5 minutes ago, the board unanimously appointed your replacement." I looked Evelyn dead in the eye. Me. The silence that filled the room was deafening. Evelyn's smug grin vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute horror. She looked rapidly between her son's pale face and the official corporate decree glowing on my tablet screen. "Julian, tell me she's lying," she demanded, her voice cracking as panic set in. "Tell this woman she can't touch your company." Julian couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as the brutal reality crashed down on him. "Vanguard Logistics isn't his, Evelyn, and neither is this house," I said, stepping closer to them. "This property was bought outright in my name before we ever got married. I let you live here out of kindness, but your lease on my generosity just expired." I pulled out my phone and tapped a short command to my security team. "Security is already waiting at the front gates. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your personal clothes and get off my property." Evelyn practically fell to her knees, her synthetic authority completely shattered. "Clara, please. We're family. You can't just throw us out onto the street. You just tried to throw me out of my own home," I replied coldly. "Julian, your severance package is $0 and the legal team will be contacting you regarding restitution for the embezzled funds. Now pack your things and get out." 2 hours later, the gates of my estate closed firmly behind Julian and Evelyn, locking them out of the life they had taken for granted. They moved into a cramped, 2-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, a modest place funded entirely by Julian's depleted personal savings while he scrambled to hire a defense attorney. Without his CEO's salary or my financial cushion, the illusions of grandeur they had built quickly crumbled. Meanwhile, I stepped into the corner office at Vanguard Logistics the very next morning. Under my direct supervision, we restructured the company's finances, cut out the bloated corporate waste, and restored full profitability within 6 months. Looking back at that evening, I don't feel anger, only relief. Evelyn thought she was stripping away my dignity when she ordered me out of my own home, but she actually handed me the key to my freedom. Never let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness, and never be afraid to remind people who really built the foundation they're standing on.